Hello, I'm Annette from the Bartholomew County Public Library.
And I'm Kate, and we are in Millrace Park. We're going to be talking about the history of Millrace Park starting from about 1821. But there is a rich and important history of Native Americans that were in the area for hundreds of years before Europeans came to the area. And they co-inhabited with the French and with migrants from the eastern United States after that as well. But we right now are just going to be focusing on the history of the area from 1821. So we are in Millrace Park. A mill race is water that's diverted from the river in kind of a narrow canal to power a mill. And this arch where we're standing has a list of industries that were along the mill race powered by that. And one of them was the Mooney Tannery, which was located to the northeast of where we are. And the wall that surrounds the parking lot here is the flood wall that was around Mooney Tannery to keep it from flooding from the river. And this arch was built from bricks that were salvaged from one of the outbuildings from the Mooney Tannery. And it was dedicated in 1966.
So the tannery that Kate mentioned, the Mooney Tannery, was begun here in this area in around 1863, I believe. And they moved it here from up in the northern part of the county, where it started there in 1837. But it was here for almost 100 years, the business was, and the building. And the building was actually torn down in 1962, I believe. Yes. Well, it closed in 1962, and then it was torn down in 1963. So it was after that when the park then was developed.
Hello, we just walked south of the arch, and we are now standing where it used to be Tipton Knoll, which is no longer a knoll. Knoll is another word for hill. So Tipton Knoll was a 20-foot high hill that was probably formed by glaciers, and it's where General Tipton had his house when he moved here. General Tipton fought in the War of 1812, and he donated the land that became Columbus. Columbus was even known as Tiptona briefly before being changed to Columbus. So also the knoll was home to a VFW residence before it was leveled in 1950 in order to allow 3rd Street to be extended.
And actually, 3rd Street at one time was called Tipton Street, so after General Tipton.
And we're going to continue a little bit further down this sidewalk.
Hi, we're here, and as far as we can go on the sidewalk in the park, and the old pump house or the Upland Brewery is right behind us back here, and the 3rd Street Bridge is actually right in front of us, so we're in between those two things.
And we are at the site of John Lindsays Ferry. In 1821, John Lindsay was granted a license to operate a ferry here across the river, which is to my left. He paid $5 a year to have the privilege of operating the ferry, and in 1827, the privilege was revoked because of failure to comply to the stipulations of the license. So he wasn't allowed to operate his ferry anymore because he wasn't following the rules that were in his agreement. And so in 1827, Joseph McKinney was given a license to operate a ferry just a little bit farther away from where this site is. And now we're going to head back north up the path back towards the main part of Millrace Park. We are standing next to a plaque, and the first line says, "This plaque is dedicated to the people and families that lived and survived Death Valley at 16 West 4th Street." So from about the 1930s to the 1960s, this area was home to an impoverished neighborhood known as Death Valley. And when the Mooney Tannery closed in 1962, there were discussions to turn this area into a park. And so the city bought the land, and all of the residents of Death Valley were asked to relocate, which was a hardship on many of the families.
And one of the families that lived here and is mentioned on the plaque that Kate talked about was Sylvia Wells Wharton. She grew up here, her family lived here, and she's written several books about living in this area, and we happen to have those books at the library in the Indiana room. So if you wanted to read more of her story, you could check those out.
We are standing here by the river where there were reports of the mill race monster climbing out of the water.
So that was a big deal when I was a kid. The park had been around since 1966 or so, and this happened in 1974, just right after Halloween. There were two different sets of ladies that reported that this monster, this huge, hairy, green monster, came up out of the river and chased them and jumped on their cars. And so after that, it was spotted a few times. It was mainly just during that 1 week, but it certainly caused a lot of concern among the citizens here. People were coming into the park with clubs. They were going to take care of this monster with clubs and knives, and then the police became, of course, very concerned because they were afraid either these people would hurt themselves or they would hurt somebody else. And so, but the monster really only appeared for like a week, and then it just sort of faded off into obscurity. But it certainly caused a lot of havoc during the time that it was here. It was described as being green and hairy and very large. It walked upright, and it was over 6 feet tall. It had claws, and we have a little picture of it. We'll show you, or what we think it might have looked like.
An artist's interpretation.
Yes, that's right. So, actually, there were UFO sightings earlier in the Midwest, and people thought that maybe the aliens might have left it here. But the park then had to be closed at night. At that time, the park was open pretty much all the time, but they had to close it at night because people were coming in here trying to find it, and they wanted to take care of it. So they were concerned about safety, and so they had to close it. But I love this quote from the newspaper. It says, "So in addition to being dangerous, the monster stories have become something of a disturbance, which brings us to the hope that whoever dreamed it up would dream it out." So it caused quite a lot of talk at that time in 1974. But it reoccurs every now and then. People remember it and want to know about it, or they come to the library and they want to know, when was that? Do you remember that? And so then we have to look up the story again. And so it was actually shared also on a television show called Monsters and Mysteries in America.
Ooh.
And they spoke to Harry McCauley, who was the county historian at the time, and a newspaper columnist for the Republic. And so they talked to him a little bit and some other people here in the community. But according to an article by Harry McCauley, he said that a young man actually confessed to the police many years later that he was the one who dressed up as the monster. Now, I have no idea who that is, but anyway, he certainly caused a big commotion back in 1974 after Halloween. So,
And if you have any other spooky stories about Columbus, we would love for you to send them in as we get ready for our October programming. We are standing next to the river marker that was dedicated by Southside Little Hoosiers in 1994. and it marks the place where the Flat Rock River and the Driftwood River come together to form the East Fork of the White River, and there's an overlook right behind us to see this.
So we're here where we filmed the three rivers coming together, and this is actually an overlook and river vista that was donated by Mildred Reeves and she donated this in memory of Carl Marshall Reeves. So this was done in 1992 when they refurbished the park and added a lot of new things to it. So
another addition to the park when it was refurbished in 1992 is this basketball court. And the original intention of this area was for the basketball court to double as a stage, and children could sit on this hill and watch the performance.
So this is the covered bridge. They call it the Brownsville Bridge. But before I talk about it, I want to talk about the bridge that was here before this one. Because the bridge that was here before this came from Clifty Creek here in Bartholomew County. When they started to design the park, they decided to put the Clifty Creek Bridge in here. They were going to have to take that covered bridge out from where it was because they were putting in a new bridge, but they still wanted to preserve it. So they thought moving it to Millrace Park would help preserve the bridge. So there was a campaign where they tried to get money to get it moved here, and they sent out like 12,000 letters to school children. So if the children would donate at least $1, they would get a certificate showing that they had donated to this bridge preservation. So that's partly how they raised the money to move the bridge here into the park. So it was actually out past where Hamilton Costco, or what we know today as Dorel Company, it was out past there. And so when they went to move it into the park, it took 2 days to move it here. And they pulled it with they took the roof off of it and they took the sides off of it. There was no floor in it. It was basically just a shell. And they moved it through fields, and they moved it up to Water Street near the water treatment plant. And that's where it stayed overnight, the first night. And then the second day, they moved it up Brown Street and brought it here into the park. They placed it here over this body of water, which looked a little different at the time. We didn't have this round lake. We didn't have that part. But anyway, people loved the covered bridge. It was the last covered bridge that was native to Bartholomew County. So everybody seemed to love the bridge.
Photobomb!
It was my favorite part of the park, and I can remember as a kid, of course, when we go through the covered bridge, we'd all honk, Dad, honk, and you can hear it echo through the bridge, and that was always fun. So I'd probably still do that. But anyway, but in 1985, the original bridge, burned down, and they thought it was arson. People were really upset. They donated money to try to catch the person who started this fire and burned down the original bridge. And it turned out that there were a couple of young boys, about 14 years old, who had waded through water and were wet up to their waist, and they came and set a small fire on the bridge to warm up and to dry out, and they thought they had put out the fire, but they moved the coals around, and they thought the fire was out. But later, or earlier in the next morning, a police officer on patrol found saw the flames and found the bridge on fire, and it was a total loss. They couldn't save it. And people were really upset about it, so, of course, because everybody loved having their covered bridge here. And so it was kind of up in the air as to what they were going to put here in its place. Did we want another covered bridge, or were they going to build a new bridge and put here? So Indianapolis, they were going to put a covered bridge in Eagle Creek, but that didn't quite work out. So they had a bridge that they had bought from the little town of Brownsville in Union County, which I think is over close to Richmond. But they had this bridge in storage for about 12 years, and somehow people here and people there got together, and we bought that bridge from them. They moved it here. They had to piece it back together. The one here was about 100 feet long, but the Brownsville Bridge originally was about 166 feet long. So they had to shorten it to put it in here, and which was really probably helpful, so that if there were parts that they couldn't replace, they could replace it with the leftover pieces, I assume. But anyway, after it was put in, approximately, almost a year later, not quite, but almost a year after the original bridge burnt, it took over a year then to finish the bridge that they put in. It still didn't have the flooring and the roof and all those things, so it was probably the next year, I think, is what I read, that they actually finished it. So then it became the Brownsville Bridge in Millrace Park, and that's the bridge you see here today. There's also a model of this bridge, the Brownsville Bridge, at the library. It sits on some file cabinets back right in front of the Indiana room. So you might want to come and take a look at that sometime. It's a really beautiful model of the bridge. So, but come and enjoy the bridge, because it's one of my favorite spots in the park.
We are standing by the boathouse over here that was put up in 1992, and there used to be paddle boat rentals here. So you could come to Millrace, rent a paddle boat here, and then paddle into the lake. And the paddle boathouse was surrounded by glass squares that look very similar to the bathrooms that are still here in Millrace Park.
Yes, and unfortunately those have been taken down. I don't know how long ago, maybe late 1990s, early 2000s. They had to remove them. They weren't using them anymore, and vandalism was an issue, so they actually ended up taking the glass blocks down, and you only basically see the base of what the boathouse was when it was there, but you can still see that there was one.
And you can see behind us, behind the fountain, there's a hill, and that's Overlook Hill, which provides a beautiful view of the whole area.
So this is Round Lake, and you can see why it is called that. It is round. It is a circle. And this was a man-made lake put in here when they redid the park, and then in around 1992. And it's right here beside the covered bridge, and they took the earth out of this area, and so all of the mounds that you see here in the park came from the earth that was taken out of this lake. So the mound over by the basketball courts, that came from here. The mound up by the amphitheater that we'll see in a little while, that mound came from here. And there are probably other ones that I haven't mentioned, but in order to develop this lake and make it for the park, they had to take the earth out of there and move it somewhere else. And fortunately, it could stay here in the park. they didn't have to ship it out anyplace. So, but the paddle boats, as Kate mentioned earlier, when they would rent them from the boathouse, they could paddle under the bridge and come out into this beautiful lake area. And I thought, I wish we still had them. I don't remember the paddle boats, but some of you might remember, and so if you want to share a story about that, about your memories of the paddle boats, we'd love to hear it. So, okay, so we're here on the stage at the amphitheater in the park, and before we talk about it, I just want to point out that way back there behind us is the playground, the newer playground. Back when I was a kid, that was not the playground that was here. In fact, I'm not even sure it's in the same spot that it was. I was thinking the playground was more over to my right, but everything's been changed so much, I'm not sure. But I know, obviously, there were different pieces on the playground. So just wanted to bring that up, that they have a new and improved playground since the days when I was a kid. But here is the amphitheater, and as I mentioned before, if you see in a minute, you'll see back behind the camera where the camera is now, but there's a hill and some seating so that it would be behind the stage. But if you look out, you can have all kinds of seating out here on the lawn whenever they have concerts and things like that. For the hospice concert that they have Labor Day weekend, this is usually filled up. And so this is a beautiful spot. But prior to this being built here, there was a group of people back in the late 60s that wanted to start a children's theater group. And so from that idea was where the Mill Race Players was born. And so late in the 1960s, around 1969, they actually built a building here called the Mill Race Playhouse. And it was, let's see, I have the dimensions here. It says the building was 32 by 56 feet overall, with the stage being 16 by 32 feet. And there were dressing rooms along with makeup and storage areas. And they finished that building in 1969, but actually the Mill Race Players at the time, their first production was to be the play of Tom Sawyer, but they didn't get the playhouse done in time to do that production, so that production was done at the Rio Theater here in town. So their actual first production that they had in the playhouse that was here was Bye Bye Birdie. So over the years they had many productions in that theater, but there was talk that it wasn't maybe as safe as it should be. So in the early 70s they had to go in and reinforce the walls of the theater. And then unfortunately in 1975, I believe it was, yes, in August of 1975, there was quite a storm here. There was not a play going on or anything like that, but there were a couple people in the building because they'd been having rehearsals there. They were rehearsing for Oklahoma. They were going to do that play, and so there were a couple people still in the playhouse, but there was a really bad windstorm, I guess, and the windstorm blew the front off of the stage and blew the walls out, and so they couldn't hold the play. They couldn't use the playhouse after that, and they actually had to postpone the showing of Oklahoma. They had to have it someplace else. The storm ruined the sets and things like that, so they weren't able to have it here, or wherever the playhouse was at that time. And so about a year later, they actually ended up hauling all of the debris away about a year after that storm happened. So that was the end of the Mill Race Playhouse in 1975, but it was not the end of the Mill Race Players. Unfortunately, they went on and they've grown since then. They've actually become a nonprofit organization now, and they're known as the Mill Race, the Mill Race Theater Group, I believe. I thought I had that here someplace, but anyway. And they are a nonprofit group, and they're still active and still doing things, so I think that's wonderful, even if they don't have a home base here in the park at this time. So, but with the new design for the park in 1992, that's when this amphitheater was put in, and you can see how nice it is and how beautiful. It has a roof over it, a little bit of a roof over it, and of course all this open area for wonderful programs and concerts and things like that. So
this is our last stop on our walking tour. If you would like to do this tour on your own, there are paper copies of the tour and a map with the stops that you can get at both circulation desks or in the Indiana room. And there is also a Google map that you can access on your smartphone, and you can have all of this information with you while you walk around the park and see where you are. Thank you so much for watching.
bye.